Christine. Why don't you get us started today by talking a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, so honestly, I fell into procurement and supply chain recruiting right out of school. So I knew I wanted to be in recruitment, but I had no idea that this was the facet of recruitment I would find myself in. But I've been with DSJ Global recruiting in this space exclusively for about 10 years. So I started out focused on procurement and sourcing roles
Mm.
specific to the consumer goods, food, and kind of FMCG space. And gradually that's grown to cover the whole of the US in all industries and all supply chain functions.
Now, when you think about where most of your time is spent focused today,
Mhm.
how would you describe those roles?
Yeah, so in terms of where the majority of my time is spent, and where the majority of my team's time is spent. So overall, we cover the whole end-to-end supply chain process. So everything from conception to consumer, whether that's product development and the engineering side of things, the manufacturing side of things at the plant, or the strategic sourcing, strategic supply chain planning, and logistics arm of things. So it really is truly from start to finish.
Now, today, what we're mostly going to focus on is demand for manufacturing
Mhm.
labor, right? And sort of how the different macroeconomic conditions that we're seeing play out in the news and on the newspapers and everything is coming together. If we did sort of like a state of the state, where would you say that things are right? So we're mid-April. Where would you say that things are right now?
Ooh, I would say that it is too soon to assign an official state of things to anything because everything is changing so quickly as it relates to supply chain and as it relates to manufacturing. What I will say though is I don't think that the market is overall contracting. So it
Okay.
varies what we're seeing in terms of talent and hiring varies significantly depending on the size of the company, the industry that they operate in, the skill, the leadership team, and what they're willing to invest in. So it is so different across the board. But I would say overall, there are more companies that are either moving forward with business as usual or
Hmm.
creating new positions versus companies that are eliminating positions or putting a freeze on hiring.
Now, it's interesting that you talk about industry and the role that that plays, because we can talk about manufacturing, but manufacturing is not a monolith,
Yeah.
right? You have industrial manufacturing is very different from, say, food manufacturing. Are you noticing any either trends or differences between the types of manufacturing around labor?
Yeah, so I would say that where we are seeing the highest demand right now for labor is skewing a little bit more on the heavily regulated side. So,
Okay.
a lot of hiring in food and beverage, a lot of hiring in chemicals, a lot of hiring in packaging. That being said, we do still very much have clients across everything from parts and components manufacturers to aerospace is an industry where we're seeing a lot of movement, to building materials who are still
Mm.
hiring. But I would say we're seeing the highest volume on the heavily regulated side for sure.
Are you seeing trends around hiring and demands for talent change at all in response to the tariffs? I mean, I know we haven't been with them for very many weeks at this point, so it does
Mhm.
take time for things to settle out. But are you so far seeing a direct connection between the uncertainty of global trade and where manufacturing is going to take place, and then the hiring activity that's happening in those companies?
Yeah, so I think the first trend that I'm seeing is that our candidates and clients are very busy. Very,
Never a
very
dull
busy.
moment. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's very much what they're telling us. But I would say there are a few trends that are shaping up currently that could very easily change depending on what the next
Yeah.
update is. I think that the first is the overall function, and the overall focus of the supply chain. Internally, it is very much evolved past just focus on cost and quality. Now we're seeing organizations focus on everything from, even pre-tariff, everything from sustainability to transformation to, geopolitical factors, everything, looking at it more holistically. And procurement and supply chain are not working so siloed anymore. So everyone is in on the conversation as it relates to the supply chain, finance, manufacturing, supply chain, legal, everyone is all working together there. So I think off the back of that, some trends that are starting to emerge would be, because there is so much scenario planning and they're running all of these different simulations and evaluating, what happens if we find a duty-free zone where there's some lower cost suppliers for us, all of this kind of stuff. So much of the supply chain team's time is being spent on strategy that I think there are maybe some holes that are starting to develop in terms of the other elements of the role that they just don't have the time or the energy to get to.
Now, I love the fact that you talked about how people are all working together. I mean, certainly that is the best way to get the best solution, but
Yep.
to have procurement and supply chain and finance all working on these problems together, when I start to couple that with some of the trends you must be seeing around talent, I feel like that might create an opportunity, right? If you have somebody who's been in finance, maybe is getting burned out on that, the more experience they have with these sort of cross-functional or overall operational conversations, the more mobility it might create for them to become a supply chain person with a background in finance or a procurement person with a background in finance. Are you finding that these conversations and how companies are solving problems are creating sort of different backgrounds that might be coming into some of these roles?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting that you say that, because one of the conversations I had recently was with a senior director of sourcing at a large global consumer goods company. And when we talked about the different talent required to navigate the current climate, she actually mentioned that when hiring for her team and when hiring for that type of organization and role in general, they're looking for individuals whose backgrounds go beyond just sourcing or procurement, and
Yeah.
highlighted, I think she herself had an accounting background before transitioning into procurement, and that's been hugely valuable there. Candidates with legal backgrounds, candidates with backgrounds in customs, candidates with backgrounds in compliance, all of these other things coming together to make a not better rounded, but a really desirable procurement professional for the time that we're in, or
Yeah.
supply chain professional.
Now, one of the other things that I have to think, and this I actually sort of pull observations from as a consumer, they always look at consumer spending as sort of a proxy for consumer confidence. And it wouldn't shock me to think that hiring planning is something of a proxy for executive leadership team confidence. What are you seeing and hearing around decisions being made around hiring that might serve as a proxy for how confident companies feel, leadership teams feel, bosses feel, and decision makers feel?
Yeah, so I can't speak for any and all organizations
Of course.
because, like I said, everyone is in a very different scenario. But a few, I guess, examples or a few things that I've picked up on. So I spoke to one VP of supply chain who mentioned that his his organization is in a strong position to hire because he's able to demonstrate the value that those additional team members will bring,
Okay.
particularly right now. So I think for a lot of supply chain organizations and for a lot of supply chain leaders, there is a great opportunity to sell in and justify how much value your teams and hiring for your teams will bring to the organization right now in the environment that we are in. I would also say, just from a data perspective, our organization has actually seen a huge uptick in the number of clients and roles we're supporting on. I think in March, we posted our highest volume of new searches that we've seen in 7 months. So that's another good indicator that
Yeah.
organizations, where they can, are still moving forward with hires right now.
Well, and it's interesting because really what you're saying is people are making the business case internally to bring in either additional headcount or to bring in additional skill sets, not entirely different from what we've been doing around tech investment over the last couple
Yeah.
of years. So any of the skills that we developed around making a business case for some form of AI, which everybody had to do over the last 18 months,
Yes.
we can sort of use that same approach to say, listen, we need someone with a customs background, or we need someone in supply chain with a finance background. And so it's an interesting way to look at maybe complicated situation as actually creating an opportunity to grow your team in different ways. Whereas if you were just going to say, can we get 3 more recs? The answer is going to be no. But if you can make the case, look, to handle this effectively, or to be ready for that, or to handle the situation right, we need to have other people in-house than we have. Seems like a really good opportunity to strengthen some of the in-house teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if the organization has the resources, and that's a big question right now, because with all of the uncertainty, I know that
Mm,
sometimes the funds or the sign off to
yeah,
bring on new hires can be a little bit tricky. Procurement supply chain has never had a bigger stage than I think that we do
true.
right now, as far as justifying the importance of investment in those teams.
Now, when we think about that investment and being able to get the resources to bring people in, where does it seem like procurement and supply chain teams are focusing their dollars? So if they can only bring in 1 or 2 people, are they focusing, junior, senior? Is it analytical skill sets? What are some of the things that you're seeing be in most demand right now?
Yeah, so I can answer it, I think, in two questions. One would be just general traits or desirable skills, and then I think the other bit would be the job titles that we're seeing clients ask for a lot of support on. The first, from a general skills perspective, I think that global experience is really in demand right now. Even if you are a US based manufacturer,
Sure.
it is very likely that your suppliers are not. And in some cases, say you work for a food manufacturer, a lot of your suppliers aren't available in the States. So that raises
Right.
a lot of questions, and definitely calls in a need for global experience. I think the other skill set that we are seeing clients look for is any sort of transformation experience. So we are working with a packaging organization right now on a director of supply chain transformation, and their whole goal is to shrink the number of warehouses that they have across the number of countries down to, I think, six major operations. So that transformation skill set is really important. I also think that the one consistent thread that I hear when I talk to every supply chain leader is they need somebody whose soft skills are
Uh,
even stronger than their technical skills, because the days of, okay, point and shoot and execute
yeah.
are very much beyond us, and they need somebody who has a strategic mindset, who's a little bit more agile, who's a little bit more of a utility player. So those are very much all of the less tangible skill sets, I guess, that I would say. In terms of where we're supporting a lot of our clients, it's a lot of end-to-end supply chain roles, which I think is maybe where they are looking for someone who has that transformation mindset and can oversee multiple projects across the supply chain. We are seeing an influx of supply chain planning roles versus what we were working on 6 months ago. A lot of category and commodity roles, and then actually an uptick in the logistics and warehousing positions relative
Okay.
to, again, how many we were working on probably 6 months ago.
Yeah. Now, when you look back, say 6 months, let's sort of flip that around and start to look forward. How far ahead does it seem like companies are planning, either around the skill sets that they need or around their ability to make the business case for hiring someone? Do they believe that 6 months out, a year out, they're going to be able to fill this role, and so they're waiting for the right person? Or do they maybe feel like things are going to change? And so if they find somebody close, they should just jump on them. How forward looking do you find that hiring managers are?
It's a good question. I don't think I can speak. I don't think I can speak fairly for all organizations. I can give my perspective and my advice on how I think that clients plan ahead versus how they should plan ahead. I think often, like we've already discussed, a lot of hiring does come down to you identify the need, you justify the headcount, then you search for a while until you find the right person. And more often than not, by the time an organization comes to us, or even when they start a search, they needed someone in the door yesterday.
Yeah.
So often organizations don't start looking for the right person until the need is pretty dire.
Yeah.
So, my advice to organizations when it comes to hiring and to supply chain leaders is where you can start hiring and start interviewing as soon as you know there is a need, because between vetting the right person, interview availability and scheduling, travel, every sign off, everything in between, it always takes longer than you think it will. The process, on average, could take a couple of months. And that is a long time to have a need that is
True.
already urgent, open, and unattended to.
Yeah. Now, what percent are you finding of the interviews that are happening in person? Are things still predominantly virtual, or is there more traveling going on to actually meet someone face to face before making a final decision?
Ooh, I think it depends very much on the function, to be totally honest with you. So, our engineers that we're recruiting, our plant managers, EHS managers, anything, warehouse managers, all of those are roles that are 100% on site. It's important
Yeah.
to the candidates to see the facility, and it's important to
Sure.
the hiring team to see how the candidate gels with the team at the facility. So, those are almost entirely in person. Um, when it comes to the supply chain strategy roles or the procurement roles, I would say it's probably 50-50. I think when clients are focused on local talent, more often than not, they will come in person, because why not?
Yeah.
But when travel is involved, it makes the process a lot longer, and sometimes isn't necessary to make a decision. So that's where I would say it's a little bit
Yeah.
more 50-50, 60-40, on if interviews are in person. But I would say we actually just completed our DSJ salary and talent report, which reported on everything from compensation, that different levels and tenure were being paid, to who received a bonus, to what percentage of respondents had flexible working. I would say most organizations have transitioned back to hybrid or on-site.
Yeah.
And we saw that in the data there too.
Yeah. Now, we focused a lot on sort of the hiring company, hiring manager perspective. But
Mhm.
before we wrap, I want to spend a little bit of time on the other side, especially given that you're talking about global experience being in demand, transformation experience being in demand, soft skills being in demand.
Yeah.
What are you seeing the best candidates do to showcase? I mean, certainly transformation experience, global experience, a little bit easier to document than something like a really well-honed soft skill. How are you finding the best candidates sort of selling themselves for these roles that they want?
Yeah, so I think that for job seekers, or even for candidates who aren't actively looking but know that their current position is not the last move that they will ever make, whether that's an internal promotion in the same organization forever, or transitioning into a new company, I think that there are a few things that they can do to try to set themselves apart. The first is, because soft skills are so important, it's not new, it's not groundbreaking, but continue feeding your network. So make sure that you are well networked, that you invest in your relationships, that you have mentors that you can talk to and go to for coaching and advice, because the supply chain world, while it is huge, can also be pretty small.
It sure
And
can.
yeah, and when it comes to hiring for soft skills, there's nothing better to get your foot in the door than if you have an advocate, someone who knows you and can say, hey, I know that this person can do XYZ. I would also say that, when it comes to certain experience, like transformation or global experience, for the time being, maybe you have it or you don't, but where you can, do your best to, get involved with projects, or create your resume, or create a resume that demonstrates the types of projects that you've worked on, where you've maybe been a little bit agile, learned new things quickly,
Yeah.
adopted new skill sets, delivered results. And yeah, just keep putting up your hand, I guess, for the time being.
And I guess you get a lot of opportunities to show off your storytelling ability, which is another one of those soft skills. If you can paint a good picture of the experiences that you've had and the things you've learned over the last few years, you're both sort of going to sell that experience and
Yeah,
also demonstrate in real time that you've got these really solid communication skills and an ability to work with other people. Um,
absolutely.
Christine, super interesting. Look, I'm actually heartened to hear that people are still hiring, that they're planning, that they're looking forward and investing in the future. If people are meeting you or learning about DSJ for the first time through this conversation, what is the best way for them to reach out and connect with you so they can find out more?
Yeah, probably the easiest way would be to find me on LinkedIn. So Christine Corson at DSJ Global. And then from there, all my contact details are listed, and I will also always reply to a message.
Awesome. Well, Christine, thank you so much for being here today to share your time and expertise.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly.